Hello and welcome to Mager Media. I am Bina Mambacho and I'm your host for Mager English. Today I'm joined by our returning guest, Robail Alamu. Robail serves as the AAA's Director of Communication. AAA stands for the Amhara Association of America. Robail, welcome to Mager Media. It's good to be with you.
As always, it's a pleasure to join you here, Binyam. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's good to be with you. Please stay with us and join the discussion, and we'll be returning after a short break. Welcome back to all of you. So today we'll be discussing the current war on Amhara that has been raging for several months now. We have seen the current developments where the Amhara regional administration has been dissolved and the freedom fighters, Fano freedom fighters, have taken those regions. They have established their own interim administration. They are protecting the bank systems. They are protecting our social institutions like schools. They are restoring the rule of law in Amhara region. And we also seen AAA's report on the human rights violations that is caused by Abiy Ahmed Ali region forces in Amhara region. We'll also be discussing that aspect. So, Robel, let's begin with discussing the current trajectory of the war on Amhara. What is your assessment and how is the war in Amhara progressing?
Thank you, Binyam. I think at this point we've now reached November, so we're entering over 6 months since the start of the war during late April. As we remember, in April of 2023, the Amhara people rose up in protests, peaceful demonstrations across 30 cities and towns in the Amhara region, calling for attention to very serious political grievances, including the ongoing Amhara genocide throughout the country, but particularly in the Oromia region, and calling for the removal or resignation of Prime Minister Abiy and his cabinet. Unfortunately, instead of answering the demands of the people that were protesting peacefully, Abiy chose to deploy his federal forces and to kill civilians, massacre them. And so we've seen this pattern of state-sponsored terror up until the full intensification of a military operation in the Amhara region that was targeting so-called extremist elements. And so, from the beginning, the goal of this military operation was very unclear, but I think experts and observers agree that this was actually based on a policy to attack the Amharas after the Pretoria Agreement of November 2022 that was signed bilaterally by the Abiy regime on one side and the TPLF, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, on the other side, in what was really a very exclusionary process. And this process, which sidelined Amharas, was categorized as essentially a war pact between these two groups to wage war on the Amhara people through a new alliance between the new Oromo hegemonic power that's been controlling the Ethiopian state and the old Tigrayan nationalist power that since lost federal dominance, but has been that retreated to the Tigray region. And so over the past few months, we've seen a very consistent pattern of fighting between these two, between the federal forces on the one hand and the Fano freedom fighters, which were actually supplemented by the Amhara special forces, many of which were disbanded earlier this year. And so these two forces have been fighting, but it's clear the Abiy regime has been the aggressor. And when we say the regime, these forces, we're talking about the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, dominated by its Oromo nationalist generals under leadership of Field Marshal Burhanu Jula, and as well as that, the Oromia Region Special Forces, as well as the Oromo Liberation Army. And there were also reports of involvement of the TPLF. And so in these military operations, in much of the time, there's been a very consistent pattern of targeting civilian targets, civilian populations, at times residential areas, in cities, in rural areas, and these violations have been very consistent. But what's been clear is that a lot of the time, these violations followed essentially military losses to the Fano freedom fighters. So it's been clear that the Abiy regime has been unable to actually defeat the Amhara resistance put up by the Fano, and as a result, has taken to collective punishment tactics and deliberate and intentional attacks on civilians to instill fear, and so this is a very genocidal pattern, and the reports that we've been seeing from Amhara region have really been unlike anything we've seen in recent history, not only in Ethiopia, but across the world, I would say.
Yeah, thank you so much, Roberto, for that highlight. Absolutely. And one of the a very frightening aspect of this war on Amhara is, Ethio 351, which is an independent media outlet in Ethiopia, just recently published some of the health crises that are deteriorating in Amhara region as a result of the war. We've seen infectious diseases running rampant in Amhara region. We've seen the amount of rape victims, Amhara women and children that are being raped by Abiy Ahmed Ali forces. And these are in a state of depression and mental health emergency. And the independent media outlet Ethio 251 reported that the Amhara Regional Health Bureau reported to the WHO that the Amhara region already has enough medications and vital supplies. And as a result of that, the region is actually seeing a scarcity and a depletion of vital medication and medical supplies in the region. As a result, clinics and hospitals all across the Amhara region are in dire situation, and patients are losing their lives. And physicians and nurses don't have the equipment that they need to operate and care for the sick in Amhara region. Not only that, but those hospitals and clinics are filled with Abiy Ahmed region forces that are being either captured or wounded in the battlefield. They are crowding each hospital system in Amhara region. So the region is almost in a position where it cannot take care of its citizens any longer. So what do you have to say in terms of the health crisis that you see in Amhara region, Ruben?
Thank you, Binyam. I think that's a very important point to certainly unpack, and I think to bring attention to, because as you said, there is a health crisis, and this is on top of the existing humanitarian crisis that was created during the Northern War that lasted over 2 years, as well as outbreaks of genocidal massacres in other parts of the country, including or especially the Oromia and Benishangul Gumuz regions, where ethnic Amharas were targeted and displaced to the Amhara region. Now, when we come back to the Amhara region, in the context of the current war, really we've seen the federal army and the Abiy regime's forces deliberately targeting hospitals and health centers across the region. We've seen patterns of attacks on hospital staff and actual patients in major hospitals servicing not just the Amhara region, but also people from neighboring regions. And this was documented in places such as Bahar Dar, Gondar, Finote Selam, Weldia, and the list goes on. And so in these hospitals, there was damage to the hospitals themselves due to reckless shelling of the facilities, as well as soldiers coming inside and forcefully taking out patients and hospital staff, at times raping female medical staff, at times killing patients, but at times also abducting them, taking them away to unknown locations, and then they would either remain missing or at times be returned days later. So this has been widely reported by Western medias. Our own organization, AAA, reported this, and in a recent report by the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, there was also mention of this pattern of conduct. And so this has resulted in actually the shutdown of various hospitals, which were already, proportionately understaffed and under-equipped to serve their local communities, to serve the region. And so on top of that, now we don't have the capacity now to treat, potentially millions of people in this country. And so we can expect that this is going to have very devastating impacts that could potentially last for years, if not decades to come, if it's not resolved soon.
Absolutely, Rabil. I agree definitely, and what I also find more of the gravity of the situation is when you
Mhm.
see the World Health Organization, WHO, or the African Center for Disease Control, CDC, or the United States Agency for International Development and Global Health. These institutions and organizations haven't said anything about what's been happening in the Amhara region. And that's more a warning to me because, like you said, a lot of the hospitals have depleted their vital medication and supply, life-saving medications and supplies. And if the Amhara civilians are not getting their medication, are not getting their medical supplies, they're not being cared for by their physicians and nurses, this is going to cause a health crisis. And infectious diseases like malaria or yellow fever are running rampant in Amhara region as a result of this war. And we need to not only mobilize the international community, but they have to be aware and understand what's been happening in our region and support and rehabilitate these people.
If I could even jump in here, Binyam,
Yeah,
I think just to tag on to this health crisis, the wider humanitarian crisis in the region has also been very devastating because what we've had was a drought, for example, in northern parts of the region, in the North Gondar and Wag Khemra zones. Just recently, there were reports from the districts such as Janamora, Ta'lemt, as well as others for example, the Sekota area, in which tens of thousands of people are now facing these drought conditions. In some cases, children have been forced to not attend schooling. So the educational crisis has been very devastating, and farmers are unable to farm. And this goes back to even the Amhara resistance protests I mentioned earlier, in which one of the main issues actually, or one of the important issues was the plight of the farmers, the Amhara farmers, which were not receiving fertilizers and seeds and other crucial resources. And I think I also mentioned the case of the IDPs, but we have tens, if not hundreds of thousands of IDPs who are actually continuing to not receive any support, not just from the government, but also from international NGOs. And so these are IDPs, Amharas, that were survivors of the genocide in many parts of the country, who are now stuck in some cases in war zones, in which now they're being victimized a second time, a third time, maybe even a fourth time by state forces. And so there's this very multi-pronged, devastating crisis. And on the topic of diseases, we saw reports of, for example, civilians contracting cholera and other communicable diseases in concentration camps. So this
yeah,
brings us to one of the other main issues, which was the mass arrests of tens of thousands of ethnic Amhara civilians throughout Amhara region, throughout Oromia region, as well as the capital city, Addis Ababa. That is the federal capital. And so these people were rounded up and placed into these, remote detention centers, sometimes in very, difficult conditions, such as the one in Afar, the Awash Arba detention center, in which these people are rounded up in very unsanitary conditions and are exposed to communicable disease that could be treated, but they just don't have access to that medical care service. And so this is all, completely unconstitutional. These are very serious human rights violations. These people are being targeted throughout the country in different forms. And I think the common thread is that they're being targeted for their Amhara identity. So this highlights how this war perpetrated by the Abiy regime is a war against the Amhara people, predominantly in the Amhara region, but also throughout the country. And I think we've seen this as a trend over the past 5-6 years since the administration came to power, and even before that.
absolutely, Robert. And I hope that the International Committee of the Red Cross, for instance, the WHO, in collaboration with the Ethiopian Red Cross, really take this matter with the utmost urgency and provide the healthcare to provide the healthcare capacities in Amhara region with their life-saving medications and surgical supplies. that they need to care for their population. Let's move on to the report that AAA released, Robel. So the Amhara Association of America recently published a report on October 21st, detailing the human rights violation in Amhara region as a result of the war on Amhara. Can you highlight some of the key takeaways from this report?
Most certainly, Biniam. Thank you for bringing that up. This report covered a period between August 3rd to October 3rd. So this is predominantly since the imposition of the state of emergency in Amhara region. And since the state of emergency was imposed across the Amhara region and also in neighboring, for example, Dera district in Addis Ababa, we documented over 807 people killed, 634 people injured, and we were able to identify names of 835 of the victims. The majority of these people were actually killed or victimized over the course of 40 civilian massacres across the Amhara region. And so we saw a pattern of extrajudicial killings, shelling, drone strikes. And I think the drone strikes were particularly a shocking development because this level of drone strikes targeting civilian populations has really never been seen before in Ethiopia, especially since Abiy came to power. And so we documented drone strikes in Finota Salam, Dambecha, Westfe Dingai, Kwarit, Wayne Waha, and Debre Berhan. So the majority of these areas were in sort of central Amhara region in the Gojam area, as well as other areas such as the North Shoa area. And there was also documentation of ethnic cleansing. And when we talk about ethnic cleansing, we're talking about, a genocidal attack on particularly the Aura Godana town located in the Minjar Shenkora district. And so Oromia region forces crossed over into the Amhara region and proceeded to attack the Amhara civilians, displace them, and expel them from their land. Thousands of households were displaced. Their houses were destroyed, and the area was essentially annexed by the Oromia regional state. And so they removed the old sign or banner in the town that indicated that it was Amhara region administration, and replaced it with a new one indicating that it was under the Oromia regional administration under the Fentale district, and they gave it a name of Korke. And so this is part of a pattern of attacks on that part of the region that has gone back several years since the Abiy regime and the Oromo Prosperity Party came to power. And so there was also reports of weaponized rape, and the number of rape cases that AAA was able to verify was relatively small. But with that being said, subsequent reports have come out, especially from the Human Rights Commission, that indicated that there was over 200 cases based on medical records alone, and the victims included displaced persons and hospital workers. And so this is a very alarming trend in which government forces are actually perpetrating sexual violence against internally displaced people, victims and survivors of genocide, and hospital workers that are supposed to be providing medical services, life-saving services to those in need, especially in a place that's affected by war. And so this is very alarming. And again, I talked about the mass detentions before. This was also included in this report, targeting Amhara civilians across the country. Although the targeting has been done against Amhara people from all walks of life, there was a number of high-profile arrests or abductions, including, for example, of Christian Tadila, official of the National Movement of Amhara, who was a parliamentarian. So these are people who are supposed to have immunity. Dr. Kasa Tashagar of the Addis Ababa City Council, and Ato Johannes Boyelo of the Amhara Region Council. And so these are all, essentially high-profile figures who had expressed varying levels of opposition to the ruling party and were essentially targeted and abducted and in some cases faced serious abuses. And on another side, we have the arrests of journalists, especially independent Amhara voices that have in some cases been arrested multiple times, especially since May 2022. And these include the likes of Gobeze Sisai, Meskara Mabera, Abbai Zodu, Dawit Bagashau, Gannet Asmamo, and the list goes on. And so these were journalists that were known for reporting on the plight of Amharas and criticizing the government for its policies, including, in some cases, complicity in these human rights violations in the genocide against Amharas, including in the Oromia region of the country. Unfortunately, these were prime targets at the beginning, in which would appear to be a very systematic approach to ensuring that reporting of the war and of planned atrocities in the Amhara region would not be covered. And this has given room for state media to flourish and really to present propaganda, state propaganda, in a way that goes unchallenged, and ensuring that people don't have information. And on this topic, another aspect of controlling the information flow was the shutdown of telecommunications and internet services across different parts of the region. And so intermittently, there has been these shutdowns in parts of the region in conjunction with military operations in which civilians would be killed and these services would be shut off so that what would be happening wouldn't be exposed and investigated by journalists, by rights groups, and by our own investigators. And so this has been very concerning. And on this topic, actually, AAA joined 44 civil society organizations led by Access Now, calling on the ruling party to restore internet access. And this was a statement that was issued back in September of this year. And so this is a very important element of it. In addition, there's been property destruction, pillaging throughout the region, destroying homes, infrastructure, using educational facilities, schools as military camps, encroaching on people's abilities to learn. And even now, students across universities in Amhara region are actually not able to continue their studies as a result of the war, and also as a result of policy decisions by the Ministry of Education, by Mr. Burhanu Negga, who's been one of the close confidants of Prime Minister Abiy and his ruling Prosperity Party. And lastly, I think we can also talk about the incitement of violence, the very alarming spread of hate speech and actually endorsements of the war, predominantly through state-affiliated individuals, the government statements directly from various levels of government, in some cases artists. And a lot of this comes from Oromo ultra-nationalist elements. And so these are elements who have, for example, released music, Oromo artists that have released music with music videos that are very vulgar, that incite hate, hate speech and violence against the Amharas, including calling for genocide of Amharas. We've seen the proliferation of dog whistle terms, terminology such as Jawisa, that was coined by the Prime Minister's special advisor, Mr. Daniel Kibret. This is actually part of a pattern of inciting genocide against a certain part of the population. Unfortunately, it hasn't received its due attention by international actors, to the point of during the last Iricha celebration, a traditional Oromo ritualistic celebration paying tribute to various religious idols. There were public endorsements of the war against Amharas, as well as incitements of a genocide to Amharas living in Oromia region. And so this is a very widely accepted, I think, pattern of incitements of violence and hate speech. And unless this is condemned, this will continue to fuel the atrocities, the mass atrocities against civilians in the Amhara region, Binya.
Thank you so much, Robert. You did a wonderful job of explaining that. You know, I've seen some of the music videos that have been kind of circulating on social media. You know, some of the very extreme Oromo artists who incite violence against Amharas. These are part of the, like you said, hate speech that are part of dehumanization campaign, and this is what's leading the genocide and the ethnic cleansing that we see in parts of Oromia and Wallagga region. And we know that Abiy Ahmed region forces, from top to bottom, most of the senior generals are Oromo nationals. And they are leading the conquest. They are leading the war in Amhara region. And the amount of drone strikes, I think you mentioned in the report, about 6 deadly drone strikes between August in September. That resulted in multiple civilian casualties. I repeat, this is civilian casualties. These are not attacking the freedom fighters' funnels. They understand how and where to go. They know the topography and the region to maneuver without being targeted by drones. But what Abiy Ahmed Ali do is when his forces lose on the battleground, he kills civilian casualties. He kills many Amhara civilians that are church going or they go into their local markets. And this is a very stark and dehumanization that we see on a daily basis in Amhara region. Let's continue, Robel. How do you assess the Amhara diaspora movements? Let's bring it back to the diaspora. We've seen a collaboration between the international Amhara movement, IAM, as well as the Amhara Popular Front, APF. We've seen committee members from both establishments coming together and discussing and working out some of their short goals as well as long-term goal objectives. And I'm also very happy to see that commitment from both sides. So, and as well as from other civic organizations and individuals, how do you assess the Amhara movement as well as resistance in the diaspora? And what can we do together to contribute for the movement on the ground?
Thank you, Binyam. I think this is a very timely and important subject because, as we see on the ground, we're witnessing a continuation of these mass atrocities against our people, and we're seeing a very fierce resistance from the final freedom fighters. And so there's really, eyes towards the diaspora, towards the people living throughout the world for support and solidarity for what's happening to the people on the ground. And I think time and time, the intensity of the atrocities has been a motivating factor and a catalyst for increased organization. We've seen more organizations coming forward and expressing interest in being a voice for the voiceless. And I think that's very positive. And so through these various structures, I think we've been able as a community to organize and actually carry out various advocacy initiatives, including, for example, protests. For example, earlier this year, we saw I Am Fano protests in solidarity with the Amhara resistance, but also condemning the human rights violations coming against Amhara people in Ethiopia. And this was seen throughout the world. We've seen protests in Canada, in the United States, throughout Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and even in Africa. So we've come to a point where these protests are international across every major continent. And I think it shows that Amharas have slowly become one of the most organized diaspora communities in the world. And I think this is very important and profound, and I think we should take pride in that. But with that being said, there certainly is more work to be done. And so I think in continuing to promote unity, continuing to promote collaboration, we can scale up and we can ensure that, for example, when we work on advocacy projects, humanitarian projects, that we can have multiple stakeholders coming to the front and, ensuring that we can expand the impact of these projects. So when we talk about advocacy, for example, AAA regularly conducts meetings with local representatives, primarily in the United States. And a lot of the times this is done in collaboration with sister Amhara organizations. And so recently there was one, I believe, in Atlanta. There have been similar meetings in other parts of the country, and I think it's very positive. I myself traveled to DC only a couple of weeks ago, and in there with a fellow colleague of mine, I was able to visit some Senate offices, and I think we were able to articulate the cause very effectively. And I think this is just part of a pattern of continuing to strengthen this work, training, for example, young professionals and youth to come forward and to lead as the next generation of organizational leaders. And I think that is also a very important priority that needs to be addressed, because that is the future generation. That is those are the kids, the people who will one day be the leaders of the diaspora, the leaders of the movement. So I think we really need to work on that matter as well. But otherwise, we're seeing a lot of promising developments, a lot of calls for unity, and I think the more that we can focus on the achievements and work on gaps, the more that we can become efficient and become effective. I think when it comes down to it, being effective is very critical here. And it's a very emotional time. Our people are all affected in one way or another, sometimes in a very personal and direct way, sometimes not so direct. But I think it's come to the problem in Ethiopia has come to a point where it's just affected so many people, and it's motivated them to become advocates in their own sense. So I think anyone can be an advocate. For example, AAA, we make our human rights reporting available publicly so that advocates can use that as a resource for awareness, for education, for advocacy meetings. So they can, anybody watching this video, for example, can schedule a meeting with your local representative, with your local office, and tell them, explain to them what's happening. If we have people who are tuning in who are, for example, good and talented writers, you can write op-eds, you can write articles. And I think these reports also inform that. So, this is how we've created this ecosystem that everyone can tune into, can plug into, and be part of the solution, rather than, being a bystander to some of these terrible things. We can see ourselves as having agency and as being able to affect change. And I think we have, the largest potential as a diaspora within the Ethiopian atmosphere, but also, I think, we've made a name for ourselves as one of the most organized diaspora communities, throughout the African diaspora, throughout the atmosphere, the diaspora in the Southern Hemisphere. So I think these are things to be proud of, to take pride in, but there's more work that needs to be done. There's more. There's a larger need. Final point. There's a large need for fundraising initiatives to support humanitarian efforts on the ground. People on the ground need our support, and so the more we can come together in unity and support those efforts, the more we can serve a people who have actually been abandoned by the people who are supposed to be administering them, by the Amhara region government. And in a way, that's also the reason why we as diaspora organizations have to function in almost every capacity to be advocates for our people, to do diplomacy on behalf of our people, to do humanitarian support on behalf of our people. It's because we're a people who don't have that representation on the ground in Ethiopia. And so I think these are areas we can focus on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Robel. You are certainly right about advocacy and diplomacy, the diplomatic work. I'm very hopeful and very optimistic about the Amhara diaspora. We've seen, for instance, recently in Charlotte, North Carolina, AAA's chair Theodros hosted a big fundraising event to help support the Amhara movement on the ground. We've seen events in London, in the UK. And coming up actually in November 11th, the Amhara Association of Bay Area, which I am part of, is hosting a San Jose Amhara forum, and we invite not just the San Jose Amhara community, but also the Amhara community elsewhere in the Bay Area to come and contribute and share your ideas and how you can help the Amhara resistance. But I'm a firm believer in the power of the individual, Robert. You can write, you can publish articles about in social literature about what's been happening to Amharas. You can write an op-ed. There's multiple. You can do fundraising. There's multiple avenues for you to contribute, and I think that is what's expected from us in the diaspora, right? We can't be on the ground supporting our heroic freedom fighters, but we have a pen, we have a brain. We can use those to our application and support the movement that way. So I want to thank you, Robel, for taking your precious time for providing us with an overview of the current Amhara resistance and some of the AAA's report on the international humanitarian law violation that's been happening in the context of the war on Amhara, and some of the Amhara resistance and collaboration in the diaspora. So thank you, Robin.
Thank you for having me, Binyam. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. It's good to have you again. And thank you for our Mugger Media family members for watching and staying tuned. And until we meet again, take care.